So Nvidia's RTX 3080 Ti has been postponed once again, but I'm going to tell you why this may actually be a good thing. So let's get started. Hey guys, Tiago here. Remember to hit that thumbs up button. Some people say for every like button that's smashed, the 3080 Ti gets about 5 minutes closer to being released. So at this rate, I think we're going to need a lot of thumbs up. Alright, so let's get into the topic of the day, and that's the RTX 3080 Ti. I'm sure you guys have heard murmurs from different places, even Gamers Nexus brought up that once again the 3080 Ti has been postponed. We're going to talk about why this may be important and why it may not be such a big deal for the gamer and the consumer at the end of the day. So first, a little brief history. What exactly is a 3080 Ti? Well, historically, we've had like the 1080 Ti, 2080 Ti. They have been pretty much the top performing GPU of their respective generation, aside from something like a Titan GPU that's always sort of mixed the lines between gaming as well as workstation performance. So in the past, if you wanted the top gaming GPU, most likely you were going to go for the Ti variant. Now, this generation, there are a lot of things that are different. First of all, we now have a 3090, and in the past we've never had a 90 series GPU before, so right off the bat the Ti is not going to be the top dog anymore, and the 90 is not a Titan GPU, as much as some people may think that it's a Titan level, as the performance is pretty extraordinary. It certainly still is not a Titan GPU. It doesn't have all of the workstation drivers and optimizations that a typical Titan GPU does, but regardless, it still is used by a lot of workstation professionals. So having said that, you can see that the Ti variant is a pretty historic moniker to attach to a GPU. Most of the time, gamers are very happy when this model comes out. I even remember when I first got the 2080 when that was released, that was pretty much the top dog. For a little while at least, you were pretty happy you had the fastest GPU. All of a sudden, they dropped the 2080 Ti. All of a sudden, the 2080 doesn't seem so hot anymore. So that's something that typically will happen. But in this case, I really think the 3080 Ti is going to enter a very crowded market. So let's talk about some of the main reasons why. And the first is, of course, going to be performance. So in terms of performance, we would expect a 3080 Ti to slot in somewhere between a 3080 and the 3090. But as it appears, the 3080 in a lot of cases already performs fairly close to the 3090, especially when you consider the price to performance proposition. It doesn't make as much sense for a 3080 Ti to just give you a couple of more frames per second. Basically, that's what it would end up being. The more interesting thing we have to look at here will be that possible 20 gigabytes of VRAM. As we all know, the 3080 has what some may think is a paltry 10 gigabytes of VRAM, but in my opinion, I still think 10 gigabytes, at least for now, is more than enough to play even at 4K for most titles. But of course, there's a caveat. It's not going to be the most future-proof, and there certainly are some use cases that you will certainly use up those 10 gigabytes of VRAM. Very demanding, high-resolution games. Certainly you can do that, so I'm not saying that it's enough for like everybody, but I'm just saying that 10 gigabytes of VRAM for most gamers that are using it to play 4K, 1440p, it certainly is more than enough, and I certainly don't consider it a poor issue at all. After all, if it really was a big issue, I don't think the 3080 would be as popular and as well performing as it is now. So having said that, having 20 gigabytes of VRAM on the 3080 Ti really does seem to be the sweet spot right underneath the 3090. We have to remember, of course, in terms of performance and the construction of the actual GPU, the 3080 Ti seems to be just a scaled down version of the 3090, instead of being something that's scaled up from the lower tier GPUs. So of course, that in and of itself already tells you it's going to be a very performant, very high quality GPU, but unless you need that 20 gigabyte of VRAM, if you're doing some type of content creation and rendering and 3D work, then of course that extra VRAM is going to come in handy for you, and you're going to be a particular use case for that GPU. But even if you're the typical high-end gamer playing at 4K, most likely you're only going to get a little bit more frames per second and possibly some better ray tracing performance with something like the 3080 Ti. Of course, it's going to perform better than a 3080, but considering how good a 3080 is, especially compared to the 3090, the 3080 Ti, the gains that it supposedly will have really doesn't seem to be a lot of room there. It really seems to come down if you need that 20 gigabytes of VRAM. If you're that particular use case, then I think, of course, that's going to be a great GPU for you. But I still think for the majority of gamers, the 3080 is going to be more than sufficient. Another reason why the 3080 Ti makes less and less sense now, when we thought the original MSRPs were going to be here to stay, for example, a $699 3080 or even a $1499 3090, it seemed like a 3080 Ti would slot in perfectly at $999. Of course, we're talking about MSRP, Founders Edition here, and while it may still slightly hold true in some rare cases, if you guys have been following my channel and following the news lately, you see that pretty much every single GPU, the third-party AIB GPUs, pretty much are experiencing very high price increases. This is both due to demand as well as the exemptions on tariffs that expired at the beginning of this year. So definitely, GPUs are a lot more expensive now. I mean, we're seeing 3080s for over $900. For example, the Asus Strix 3080 is around $929. And when we thought the 3080 Ti was going to be $999, well, that's certainly not going to be the case. Now, even 3090s that are just like regular vanilla 3090s, nothing too interesting. I've seen various 3090s from brands like PNY and MSI for over $2,000. And we're talking about MSRP here. This isn't even like a scalper price or anything like that. Everything just has gone up from 10 to sometimes as much as 25%, and it's certainly a significant difference, and that makes the 3080 Ti no longer really as attractive. The reason why people love the 3080 is because starting at $699, it seemed to be a Ti level performance GPU, but now that we have a 3080 Ti, probably the price is going to be closer to what the original 3090 price was. I'm not too sure if people are going to stomach that, especially considering that it's not going to perform anywhere near as well as the 3090 because it is the GPU that slots in lower as well as having less gigabytes of VRAM. So when people see a 3080 Ti on the shelf, maybe it's going to be $1,200, $1,300, $1,400, they're going to remember that the 3090 started at $1,500 and people already did not like the 3090 at that price, even though a lot of them sold out because of limited stock of every other GPU. You could tell that people were much more happy buying a 3070 or 3080 just because the price to performance ratio is so much more satisfying. As we got to the 3090, it just seemed to be much more expensive than the 3080 for the performance that you're getting. Like I said, between a 3090 and a 3080, the performance delta really is not that big and certainly does not justify the price, and that's going to translate into the 3080 Ti. If it had been MSRP closer to $999, then of course I think it would make a lot of sense, because then you're just getting a little bit scaled down 3090 and saving $500. But judging by pricing on all of the other GPUs that just took effect, it's going to be hundreds of dollars above $999, therefore making it not really a very great price to performance proposition, even if the 3090 now is itself over $2,000 for a lot of models. So what are some other possible reasons why Nvidia may be holding on to the 3080 and not releasing it as of yet? Well, it seems like they do want to try to at least catch up in manufacturing these other SKUs. Of course, if they're going for 3080 Ti's, they're going to have to do a lot of energy, focus a lot on that GPU as well. So at least I think they're probably satisfied with the rate that the GPUs are selling at now, be it a 3080, 3090, 3070. So they figure they probably don't need to throw in another SKU into the mix. It's just going to confuse people, and it's not really necessary to get people excited. Typically, you would release the 3080 Ti, the Ti variant, when you see that maybe demand is starting to slow a little bit or the excitement is sort of going down. That way, it sort of rejuvenates all of the excitement for a new GPU. But since the excitement seems to be pegged at 100% consistently all of the time, as we can tell from everything being sold out instantly, I think it makes sense for Nvidia to hold that Ti variant maybe for a few months more until it makes sense that they can actually produce it in the market. I don't really think they want to release another GPU that people are just going to make a joke over that it's out of stock, out of stock, out of stock. So maybe they'll hold it off until the point where other GPUs are more readily available. That way it takes some of the pressure off the demand on the 3080 Ti. And then of course all of the issues together with that, it's going to be a very expensive GPU with the new exemptions on the tariffs. Not to mention that performance wise, it's not really something that there's a need for in the market. The 3080 is enough for most people. People that want a 3090 get a 3090. So it doesn't seem like that gap really needs to be filled so quickly. Of course, in the future, if prices stabilize, it will make sense to have different SKUs at different levels, but as of right now, I really think the more pressing issue is to get sort of stock into the hand of gamers for GPUs that have already been released and announced. So if you're in the market for a GPU and you were looking at the 3080 Ti, in my opinion, what should you do? Well, I don't think it makes sense to wait for it. If you can find a 3080 or even a 3090 that still has a reasonable price, and not every single MSRP has gone up across the board. Most have, but you may still be able to get lucky and find a Founders Edition for a cheaper price. The 3080 Ti will also come with increased pricing, so I would say if you need a GPU, I wouldn't even wait for it. I would just get whatever you can find available now. There's not much there with the performance anyway, unless you need the 20 gigabytes of VRAM, then of course you can plan for that. Overall, I think the 3080 and the 3090 pretty much satisfies most of the market's need in terms of performance, so a 3080 Ti would only really be very appealing if it came at higher stock and higher availability. That's definitely the metric that we really want to measure, is availability and stock for gamers. So unless that's the case, I'd rather them focus on stock for the current stuff, and that's going to make gamers a lot more happy. Alright guys, so remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.